Okay. Um, good evening. I'd like to call a meeting to order. My name is Jim Sanders. I'm the chairman of the 7-Eleven committee. And I'd like to take roll at the beginning here, if I may. Let's see. Yes. Oh, thank you. Vice Chair Art Rentiwa.
Here.
Secretary Samantha Torres.
Here.
Member Guadalupe and Lana.
Here.
Member Don Gosling.
Here.
Member Summer Sigler.
Here.
Thank you.
No lids?
I count. Where's Dorea?
Are we recording?
Not here.
Not here.
Are we recording? Yes.
We are recording.
Oh, there's a red light.
Okay, do you all have the agenda in front of you?
No minutes.
So, I'd like to entertain an approval of the agenda if there are no objections. John?
I am concerned about the language used in times E1 and E2, that it's ambiguous and not as crystal clear as it could be. When it says, for instance, on E1, committee members may discuss if they recommend the site to be deemed surplus. It suggests that those that did not recommend the site to be deemed surplus won't have a voice. And you have something.
No.
I
Let me clarify that. So, let's change that. Committee members may discuss, if the site has been deemed surplus.
Can we change the agenda that's been sent out?
No.
No, but it looks like to address the member's concern on E1. E1 looks like it's a recommendation, a decision on surplus. And then E2 would be a decision on priority uses. Obviously, we would have discussion during that time. We're not only gonna discuss whether or not it should be surplus. We're gonna
Mhm.
discuss both sides of it, so.
But it doesn't
That's
say
covered.
that.
But it is certainly implied and covered in.
I'm not saying it is applied. I'm saying it's ambiguous and it could be misinterpreted to read either way.
Do you have a recommendation, Don?
Well, it bothers me that if we continue with it, if somebody could come back and say we didn't even have a right to discuss it, or that we were excluding half of the members here if they voted against it.
Well, I don't,
You can certainly take that up in the next agenda. We've already posted this.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear you.
so the recommendation is that we, take your observation up on the next agenda.
But that doesn't address this agenda.
I understand your point. The E1 is to determine if a site is surplus. That's simply the question, on E1. So how does the first sentence of E1 preclude discussion in your mind?
The last line on each of these items specifically, it decides who is going to be allowed to speak on it. Is it,
It doesn't, the word may is not, it's not a condition. You know, as in shall or will. The word may is, what do I want to call it?
I understand the difference between may and shall, but the language used here is only the people that voted to recommend the site be deemed surplus may discuss.
I think with the they,
I think that's too strict a reading of this, frankly.
Well, I just wonder how a judge would rule.
If I
No,
may,
serious, if it went down to that.
Or shall we get a legal opinion?
yeah, and I'm not a judge, but I'll urge a legal opinion. This language is 100% appropriate. It's clear that the intention is to discuss whether or not it's surplus. Nobody's going to determine that this listing, the way this is in the agenda, would mean that anybody who did not want to deem it surplus could not speak. So this is supposed to be a reasonable notice to the public of an item. Nobody's going to read this description to say that anybody who didn't want to find it surplus could not speak. So I think we should move on.
Okay, I would want to make sure that this discussion is mentioned in the minutes though, because it may come back to bite us.
Um,
That's not a discussion. We're going to-
you know, it's, so we're
Let's
gonna,
move on. You're on, motion.
I'm sorry.
so if there are no further objections,
We adopt.
the agenda is adopted as presented.
I still object to it. I'm sorry, I still object to
Okay,
it.
so we'll do a vote, all right?
I know you don't like me being there.
No,
The
Don,
outlier. I see it on your face so many times.
Don, it's, anything personal is not appropriate for this meeting. Thank you.
I agree. I'm sorry.
With respect to the agenda, we're just gonna take a roll call vote to see who approves of the agenda as presented. So, and I'll take the last vote on the list. So let me start out with the vice chair, Mr. Renteela.
For argument's sake, I'll abstain.
Ms. Torres,
I. Affirmative,
aye?
yeah, affirmative, I.
Yes. Guadalupe, Milano,
Aye.
aye. Don Gosling,
No.
Summer Sigler,
Yes.
the chair votes yes. Well,
You don't have.
There's- well, we have how many members here? 6?
So we have 3 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstain.
3 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstain.
Correct.
So what is,
Adopted.
so the agenda is adopted.
Mhm.
Okay, sure, move on. The approval of meeting minutes,
Right, that's about it.
they are not attached.
No.
They're being revised,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
we don't have minutes to be approved. Anticipated future meetings, still June 11 of 24. If there are no objections, the meeting will stand as scheduled. Okay, done. Public comment. The public will have different opportunities to address the committee. The public can address the committee during public comment. And before an action or discussion item, the public can provide public comment in person via the Zoom app and by telephone. Public comment will last approximately 10 minutes. The time allotted for each speaker is 2 minutes. If you are attending the meeting in person, you will need to submit a request to address the board form to indicate your desire to speak during the public comment. During public comment on a non-agenda item before the item begins on an agenda item. If participating via Zoom, you will need to raise your hand by clicking the appropriate icon in the Zoom app or by pressing *9 if accessing by phone. No yielding of time or substitution of speaker is permitted. The public will have an opportunity to make public comments on agenda items after the presentation for each discussion or action item. The time allotted for public comment on each action or discussion item and items not discussed on the agenda will be no more than 10 minutes and 2 minutes per speaker. Due to the Brown Act, committee members cannot discuss items not on the agenda and do not usually respond to items presented in public comment. Special accommodations upon written request to the district, disability-related modifications or accommodations, including auxiliary aids or services, will be provided. Please contact the facilities office at least at 510-307-4545, at least 45 hours in advance of meetings. And now my question, Mr. Freeze, do we have any hands raised for public comment?
We do not have any hands raised.
Thank you very much. Moving on to action items, and E1. The recommendation to determine if a site is surplus. Discussion and action to recommend if a site is deemed surplus. Behind me, I just put up a whiteboard. This is what I understand well as a teacher. So I listed the 4 sites. And I understand that we need a motion to render each site surplus. And so now I'd like to entertain the first motion regarding whether a site should be surplus or not. And the first site of discussion, listing them alphabetically, is Adams, Don?
I just want to remind everybody that February 28th of last year, this committee, 4 members of which are still on this committee, voted unanimously to recommend to the board that all 4 sites be declared surplus. I mean, it's up to this body if they want to rescind that motion and to vote otherwise, but right now the motion is still in effect that they are all to be recommended to be deemed surplus.
I understand your point. However, the committee has been reconstituted and committee has been reconstituted. There are new members and other members that were there then that are not here now. I understand your point that a quorum was present then. But it doesn't mean we're locked in stone. We can make a motion that supersedes an existing motion and substitute the new motion with respect to your observation as to when we made a motion back in February of last year.
Yeah, I object to the word reconstituted. It sounds like we were disbanded and then reformed. And that's not the case. This committee's continued to exist. We just didn't have a meeting for another year. But it was the same body. The committee never ceased to exist.
If I may, Don, would you be,
Excuse me a second. I just want to remind everybody that if you want to be recognized, you should address me and then I will recognize you. Sam?
do you think it would be acceptable if we make a motion or we all vote to nullify the February decision before we move forward?
Don?
If you wanted to have a motion to rescind on each individual site, that's up to this body to do. But if the motion to rescind kind of contradicts what this direction of this body is gonna do, if they're, I mean, since let's just take Adams, that the body has already voted to recommend that it be declared surplus. And if we continue with that, why do we have to rescind it? Unless we want to just show everybody that we're in charge now and that the other group didn't really exist.
All right, let me make a suggestion to you. The only difference between then and now is one site. And at our last meeting, as I recall, we don't have the minutes in front of us, but I believe that we had a discussion and a motion to reserve the Harmon Knolls site for a school in the future. And that seems, and as was pointed out by Member Ziegler, the idea of surplus is not the same as the idea of sale. So if a site has been determined to be surplus, it doesn't mean it necessarily has to be sold. It can be reserved for future educational purposes, which is really what the issue is with respect to Harmon Knolls.
I'm sorry, you just said if it's deemed to be surplus, it can still be used for education.
That's
Well,
correct.
I thought it was just the opposite. If we declare it to be surplus, it's because it cannot be used or should not be used for education.
Correct.
Yeah.
You had asked for a motion for Adams for surplus.
Oh,
Right.
so the
So
discussion
let
is
me go back one step. And and maybe it'll make you happy. If we recognize the decision that you cite on the 28th of February, then the question is, should it be sold? Or leased? Those are two options where we allow a developer to come in and do something on the site that renders income to this district. And we can take up each of these sites on the question of sale, lease, or reserve.
That's
Okay.
the motion that we would have. So if the member is saying we go off the recommendations that the last board did, then we would need to have the minutes from what the last board did. Otherwise, it's perfectly fine to have this board make a new motion, and it would be certainly cleaner in that sense.
Okay.
So,
Art,
was that any motion?
Through the chair, I just wanted to ask, because we weren't present for the last iteration of this committee. And was it known then that Hilltop Mall was gonna be developed? Was it known then that Adams it was going to be rezoned?
no,
Again, we're moving into debate and we have no motion. So did you want to go back to Adams? Do we get a motion, a vote?
yeah, I do.
Okay.
So,
Can I ask for clarification, Chair?
sure,
So we're voting on undoing the past decision, not because we disagree with it, but because we disagree that the past decision should be influencing our decision now? Are we just undoing the decision, or are we undoing it to change the decision? And now, I know these are different questions, different mechanisms. I want to be clear that I support the idea of rescinding a prior decision, even if I would to vote the same way to pacify Dawn's concerns about changes over time. So that was my proposal. Is, I'm likely not to change my opinion from the last time we made this motion, but if this is what it takes for us to move forward in productive conversation, then I think we should entertain it.
Mr. Chair, I have a suggestion,
Mr.
which would be that if there are no objections, any decisions based on these properties by prior boards is hereby rescinded, and we will start over. Say, God, look it up for you. We don't need to do that, but if that's gonna make everyone happy, and this will go into the minutes.
So,
This is.
so
This one's-
let's try one more time. If there are no objections, any decision made by the prior board is rescinded, and we can discuss things afresh.
Great, motion passed. And now we're moving on.
What?
The motion, we had no objection.
Wait, I thought you were just reading it.
Yeah.
You didn't ask the question.
What's-
Yeah,
said if
what's
there are
the
no
question?
objections? If there are no,
That
wasn't
was-
clear. Yeah, that was.
No, I'm saying, all I saw was he was reading what you were writing. You were telling him what to read. That's all I saw.
okay, Dawn,
Try again.
so, yeah. What we want to do, excuse me, let me get this idea across to you, perhaps you'll entertain it. We have 3 new members of the board. If we're stuck in cement with your objection, effectively, those 3 new members are disenfranchised, which I object to. I think that's simply not reasonable. People have volunteered their time to serve on this board. They should be heard just as you were heard. And so if we rescind the prior motion and start afresh with the members that are here, we can come to the same conclusion with respect to each property, but at least they will have had a vote. And that seems to be, in my humble opinion, the reasonable course of action, rather than saying, I'm sorry, you weren't here in this prior year, so you have no say. That simply is unfair. Art?
Wouldn't that require a motion in the vote?
Yes.
So I typed out the motion, and he's reading the motion, he's using the.
So I was using the premise that if there are no objections, there is an objection. So let me try it again.
I don't think you had an objection, I think it was not understood that you were saying the motion. So I think you can start over, being very clear, this is a motion that the chair is putting in front of you.
Okay. So let me put this in front of you and just see how it goes. If there are no objections, set the premise. Any decisions based on the properties by prior board is hereby rescinded. So I'm gonna pause. We're done. So now we do a motion on each property as we go.
I'm sorry, I thought you were just still repeating your motion, or your premise. I said,
was.
Okay.
I mean, just to, I think, clarify, it seems that you were just taking a pause or a break. And I think if you use that, if there, I mean, I think the whole, to be more clear, if there's no objections, just add it to the end. And I think then we could say there's an objection, because I think you're saying it in the front and then you're pausing, and then Ms. Tammy is just saying, motion approved.
It is a 3-second pause, Mr. Chair, to allow for objections. That is
I know.
how
Yeah.
the motion is made.
Um,
This,
are you voicing an objection?
I'm just trying to make this process go faster, so if the objections, pause, is there any objection, pause 3 seconds? Somebody, if there's an objection, they could come through, versus you're saying it at the beginning, saying if there is no objections to my motion, and then you're reading the motion, and then you're stopping to take a breath, and then motion is passed. When I think Don is kind of taking that as you're taking a breath, or he doesn't know if your sentence is done.
Okay.
So try it again.
Yeah.
Here is the motion. The 4 properties, the decision, shall we rewrite this a little bit? The decision on the four properties by prior boards is hereby rescinded if there are no objections.
I do object to the process, but to allow us to move forward, just go along with the flow.
Okay.
Is that, so that's not an objection to the motion.
I think
Okay.
that's not an objection. All right, so now I put the 4 properties up here. And so I'd like to take them one at a time with a motion on each as to whether it's declared surplus or not. So, would any member like to make a motion with respect to Adams?
I make a motion
I move.
I move to recommend that this committee, recommend, the board make this, Adams site a surplus site.
I will second it.
Okay, so moved and seconded that Adams is a surplus site. We'll do a roll call vote.
You can always.
I can always try if there are no objections. If there are no objections, Adams is a surplus site. Done. Harmon Knowles.
I will make a motion that Harmon Knowles be recommended to the board to be declared a surplus site.
Is there a second?
I second it.
So moved and seconded that Harmon Knowles be declared a surplus site. Is there any, if there are no objections,
I would like to object.
there is an objection.
I would like to remove Harmon Knowles from the surplus, list.
Well, we just have to vote against the motion.
Hold on 1 second. Because there was an objection, we're gonna go back to Mr. Gosney. And he gets to speak first, and then anyone can speak.
Okay, Don,
What is the question? You're asking me?
and speak in favor of your motion, please.
All right, I will do that. I do not believe that Harmon Knowles can be reused as an educational site in the foreseeable future, and I'm saying 12 to 15 to 17 years. I believe that it can better serve the community and the district as something other than an educational site. I don't believe that a bond will be passed to build a new school there. We have no idea for sure how many additional school-age children, elementary school children will be in that area in the foreseeable future, and whether the board and the public would authorize a bond or the expenditure of money to build a new school in that area in the next 12, 17 years or longer. As I just still believe that the community would be better served, at looking at alternative sites or alternative options.
All right,
I disagree with Don, and the community, disagrees with Don. There were letters submitted on behalf of, County Supervisor John Joya, Mayor Eduardo Martinez, the District Two City Council person, and, Pearl Lodges, and a few others in the community, stating that, we need, to save Harmon Knolls for a future school site because of the fact that, the new fact that, Pearl Lodges is having, an event Thursday to announce, the development, for the Hilltop Mall site, which is in walking distance from the Harmon Knolls. And with 895 to 1,500 new homes, those kids are gonna need a public school to go to. And so are the kids in my neighborhood, which is the Fairmead Hilltop neighborhood. So I object, to Don's motion.
Marlon, any points?
I think my only hesitation on the Harmon site is that it is the only site that is still deemed to be used as a school site, and maybe, you know, just holding that would be holding on to any feasible, usable site at this point. Is in, I think, my voting.
Okay, thank you. Summer?
I think this is the toughest one, right, of all of them, because the property could be built on for a school. And so I do hear that. I do think that the concern I have is knowing that the budgets are overshot with the 3 schools being rebuilt right now, and wondering, even if the land was leased out to something else, it doesn't have to be leased forever. Like, it could be revenue that actually allows it to be rebuilt if that was in 20 years. And I don't know when those developments are going up or how long they'll take. I mean, we've seen 5 different proposals for Hilltop Mall. And they all get stuck in red tape. And so I hope that the development goes through, but I also hate banking something on that.
Sam?
I agree with a lot of what Summer is saying. It is risky to recommend for it to be surplus, knowing that, it may be needed in a couple decades, maybe several decades, for a school site, could possibly be. But I mostly agree with Summer because there are a lot of opportunities in the meantime to take value from that land, including its current purpose, which is as a park. This neighborhood has a shortage of green space, and Hilltop Park and this facility, this area, if marked surplus, there is a risk of what happens to the site or whatever. But I think that if it were to be offered as surplus, there is the opportunity for the city of Richmond to participate in, you know, agreements on how to use the land, to lease it, to contribute to its maintenance or whatever. I know that the joint use agreement is still in process, but I think that we haven't paid enough attention to the recreational value of this land, and that is an adequate, really good idea in the meantime until a school can be built. So that's my main motivation, aside from what everything Summer said, which is, I think, very, very practical. I think very, you know, safe. Everything that she said was very much aligned with what I want, but also, considering the quality of life and what that park brings.
Don?
Just to rebut a couple of things that were said after I spoke the first time around. We don't know what this city council will allow to be done at Hilltop, or will require to be done at Hilltop. It's still a major assumption. In Prologis, the owners of the property can propose all kinds of things, but we have all heard numerous times what some of these city council members have said about what they will demand be done at that site. So we don't know how many residential units will be there and how many school-aged children will be there. Or if anything will happen in the foreseeable future. But as for the site itself, the idea of developing it with the idea of reclaiming it, say 20 years, as Summer said, most businesses aren't going to pay to build something on there, knowing fully well that they'll have to walk away from that investment in, it's just, again, use 20 years as an example, and tear down their buildings. And whether if it's used as a park, and I love parks, but, who's gonna pay for the park? Who's gonna put in the park? Who's gonna pay for it? And what kind of revenue might that bring in to the school district? If it was leased to the city, for instance, as a park, I don't know, or East Bay Regional Parks for that matter. There's just too many unanswered questions on there about what can be done with the site, as opposed to, well, just stop there.
Okay.
Chair?
Mr. Hart?
Yeah, I'm not gonna debate it, Don, I know how Don feels, we've talked about it ad nauseum, but, my point is that, there will be a need for, property, whether it's Harmon Knolls or not, as far as schools are concerned. And, we've got 3 other properties that could be, sold, this could be surplus later. This property could certainly be surplus later. It doesn't necessarily have to go with everything, you don't wanna flush everything down the kitchen sink at one time.
I'd like to offer a few points. One, if the property was sold and once something was built on that property, not a school, that site will be forever, denied an educational use. And that concerns me. Another issue is with development, usually there are developer fees that are paid to public entities. And some developer fees can be applied to a school. Now, I understand Don is very close to the CDOC as a member. And he understands that there are limits to how much indebtedness the district can take on, given the value of real property in the county. However, that number is a moving target. As properties turn over, when I'm using nominal dollars, the overall assessed value of the district rises. And so as that would take place over time, just to give you a for instance, if we're gonna go 20 years or 25 years, the house I occupy we bought it for 300,000 and it's now about $1.5 million. That's a factor of 5. As properties increase in value, nominal dollars, not real dollars, that ceiling that keeps our bonded indebtedness limited will rise. So thinking about the future, and that's really what we're talking about, there will be some capacity that will appear over time. And we will also be paying down bonds over time. So given the permanence of the decision to sell and develop it otherwise, it seems unwise. Thank you. It might be prudent to declare surplus with a recommendation that it not be sold, that it be reserved, and in the meantime, the recreational purpose, which is basically 40% of the site, because I don't see a line drawn. As we look at the image, there's a demarcation between the school site and the recreational land that's to the north of it. So this district is free to enter into a joint use agreement of that site for recreational purposes and reserve the school site for a school. So I think that's the perhaps a better course of action. Guadalupe?
And I'm trying to wrap my head around what you just said, as in our recommendation would be, and I think that's the accurate word that we need to use, recommendation, because when this goes up to the board, we're just recommending. I sit on many committees where we're recommending things, And not because we recommend a certain usage means that they're gonna adopt that usage. And that they're gonna abide by, oh, yes, this is what you're recommending, so yeah, we're gonna follow through. I think once we surplus it, they're free to do at will's end. So I think that's my hesitation with, this surplusing a site that is still able, because when we do recommendations, they don't have to, the board does not have to abide by whatever we're recommending here.
Okay,
And they're just recommendations, I think, moving forward.
okay, could we hear the motion again, please?
Yes. Member Gosney moved to recommend the Harmon Knolls site as a surplus site, and it was seconded.
Okay, shall we move on to voting? All right, this will be a roll call vote on Mr. Antimo,
No.
Ms. Torres,
Yes,
Ms. Milano,
No,
Mr. Gosling,
Yes.
Ms. Sigler,
Yes.
So, Ms. Lana was a no?
she was a no.
Okay, so 3 yes, 2 no. This is actually
And now
one of those odd situations.
can I vote?
You could vote only to affect the outcome of the vote, which would mean you would have to vote in a no. You could not vote yes. And if you voted no, it means a motion fails.
No.
Chair votes no, thank you. So it is now a tie.
Motion failed.
now we move on to discussion.
Any other motion? Mr. Antimo, would you like to make a motion? What was your question?
Oh, I want a discussion.
We don't have a motion on the floor. Are you making a motion
I would like to move to have discussion post vote
with respect to Harmon Knolls?
with respect to the vote we just made, yeah.
You have a question about it?
No, I want-
What's the question?
Well, I mean, I think for me now is if it's not voted surplus, what are your recommendations?
We
And
we can visit it in a later meeting.
We can make another motion right now, just because this
Isn't that
part
what,
failed.
yeah,
We
so,
can do more.
okay. So can we move to discuss recommendations for alternate uses?
We're dealing with the issue of surplus or not surplus.
And,
Actually,
well, there
That's
was,
part of the.
if
hold
motion
on.
failed.
The motion failed. What you're asking for is E2.
Okay.
Discussion and action to adopt a list of priority uses for each site. So we'll get
Okay.
there.
All right,
This item is just for surplus.
What about my motion to remove it from the surplus list?
That wasn't, you didn't make that as an amendment. So if you want to make that as a motion.
I did.
As a motion.
So
I did.
it was not made as a motion. Okay. So if you want to make it as a motion now,
One more time, please.
I'd like to make a motion to remove Harmon Knolls from the surplus list.
Point of order on that?
Since we did not vote to put it on the surplus list, there's nothing to take it off of. It still remains on a non-surplus list. So this is kind of a redundancy. It doesn't serve a purpose.
that's actually correct, because you haven't put
Yeah,
it on the
right.
surplus.
No, no.
So we don't.
It's not,
we don't-
it's not on
we don't
surplus
like
list. I was about to put a no up here. So. Okay, moving on to Portola.
I will make a motion that we recommend to the board that Portal be declared a surplus site.
Mr.
Second.
Jackson, yes, pardon?
Second.
Second, it's been moved and seconded that Portal be declared surplus. If there are no objections. Done. And with respect to Seaview,
I make a motion that Seaview be recommended to the board to be declared surplus.
Also second.
second. In the absence, if there are no objections, the motion is adopted. Done. Okay. Next has to do with, priority uses for the surplus sites. So, we have a lot of communication about Harmon Knolls, since Harmon Knolls is not on the surplus site, or the list at the moment. I don't know if I want to visit that one, but let's visit, Adams. Priority use for Adams. Ron?
So I have a concern that we had asked for presentations on workforce housing, on the swapping properties, on the rezoning. And without that information, I think we're premature on even talking about possible reuses on all three of the sites, because we're, again, there's too much lack of information that we just haven't received yet. And keep in mind, just because the four of us received information prior to March fifth, these new people have not received anything about swapping and other types of reuses.
Mr. Malone, is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Is the member making a motion to postpone E2 until that information is provided? I wasn't sure if you were making a comment or a motion. I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure I got that.
No, I mean, I was making a comment, that it essentially saying that it's premature to even have a discussion about this. I mean, if we have to have a motion to stop any possible discussion about this at this time, then I'll make such a motion. I make a motion that we hold off on discussion about potential reuses for these three other sites until we've heard the presentations about what kind of options are available.
Mr. Freed, do you have a comment?
Making a recommendation or suggesting the use of the property has, I don't know the nexus between having a presentation on workforce housing. So the committee can make a recommendation or suggest uses of it. The board can then request that a study be done or a presentation be brought forward on workforce housing or any one of the other items.
If I can add, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, through the chair. I was also wondering, to Don's point, that, these, zoning, changes are coming into effect. We really don't have any clarity on, what the zoning changes are gonna do to our recommendations.
Okay, may I ask, I didn't quite get all of, well, we're talking about a motion though, I wanna make sure I've got Don's motion. You move to postpone any discussion or action on the uses for sites until what presentations? I know you said it, I didn't catch the.
Until we've had presentations on workforce housing, on swapping properties and other
Hold on one moment, workforce, housing,
workforce housing, swapping
swapping,
properties, and zoning, and other potential reuse options.
It's
Is
appropriate.
there a second?
Yes, second.
okay, we went into discussion.
Right. So now, now we're into discussion. So Don, you're the maker of the motion.
Well, once again, some of us have been here on this same committee since the very beginning. We've had the benefit of hearing presentations, not about workforce housing, but at least about swapping, selling, and possibly other reuse options. But the three new people have not had those presentations to understand the benefits. I also recall when this was brought before the board, 4 or 5 years ago, when Dr. Wold brought it up. So I'm a little bit more familiar with some of these options. But there's a lot of details involved with all these, but workforce housing in particular is a very controversial subject. And I think we need to know, have presentations on the viability of workforce housing in this community. Our representatives from Terra Realty told us on the record that no district in California has successfully transitioned to workforce housing. But we have a board member of the West Contra Costa Unified School District and the County Board of Education are both saying, no, there are a couple of them. So we're getting conflicting information on here. I requested of both of those two trustees, please share with me your information. It's been nearly 2 weeks here, a couple of hours will be 2 weeks since I asked that question. I have not got a response back on it. But I'd like to know about workforce housing. I would hope that everybody else would want to know about workforce housing. And the possibility of how it would work, because the devil's in the details on that. But there's just too much information that we have not yet heard and seen. And the rezoning, that's critical. We got 2 out of the 3 sites that we're discussing that we've been told by the lady in charge of that with the county, Maureen Toms. We've also been told by County Supervisor John Joya that rezoning of those is in the works. I thought that Maureen Tom said it had already passed the board of supervisors, but I can't swear on that one.
That's the letter that
Okay, and so that most likely will impact what it can be done there, but also the value of the property on there. And we had also asked on this future agenda item to get a presentation from Jared Mill Realty about how the rezoning would affect the value and the possible reuse sites, especially Seaview, which where the CCR is saying that they can only have so many pieces of property there. And the county is saying, we don't care about what CCRs are, we're calling the shots. Yeah, too little information.
those conditions, the CCRs have to be resolved in court by the developer. If one is going against the CCNR, if you find yourself too constrained, then you go to court to see if the CCRs can be lifted. And that would be the task of the developer. That's my understanding of it.
If I can interrupt, I apologize, but what I heard from Maureen Toms was, no. What you just said, what I understood as well, no, it says the county says that you must build X number of units on there. That's all that matters, that the CCRs are meaningless. So again, I'd like to know, which takes precedence over that. We only had an attorney in the room.
And I'm willing to speak right now if you'd like.
Go ahead.
If I can, just briefly to pull everyone back just a half a step. This is the 7-Eleven committee. What would you like to see on the properties? That's almost the question that we have in front of you right now. Not how to do it, or is there gonna be legal problems? Is the county gonna be okay? Is the city gonna be okay? How much? We can look at the value a little bit. The question before this committee is not, can the district do workforce housing there? Do you want workforce housing there? Do you want the teachers and employees to have workforce housing? Do you want it to be turned over to developers? Do you want it to be kept as a park? What are the priority uses you want? Not how to do it. That's not before this committee. What's before this committee right now is, what do you think would be a good use of that? Would Harmon Knolls be a good place for workforce housing? Do you guys feel that that's the case? Would Portland, would Apt? That's the question before you. So the question before you isn't, how would it be done? Are we gonna have restrictions on zoning, et cetera? That's not before you necessarily. That's in front of the board, ultimately, if they take your recommendation and move forward with it. And we spend years figuring out how to do that. Just wanna put that a little bit of
Just a minute,
context.
Don. Art?
Yeah, through the chair, I would like to ask, so are you suggesting that we don't have to take into consideration, the zoning, for these properties? We could just come
I'll
up
say
with-
yes and no in answer to your question, but I will try to explain that a little bit. School districts are exempt from local zoning with a lot of restrictions. This one actually has been rezoned. What do you have up on there? Which one
This is, Adams.
Adams
So
side.
here's the latest information on the design.
So they've already incorporated that into their housing element and altered it. There's also a new statute, AB 2295, attributed only for workforce housing. And it talks about what school districts can do to not avoid local zoning, but it lowers the requirements when working with cities on local zoning for workforce housing. So I said yes and no, because the answer to your question is probably about 2 years worth of explanation on a brand new statute, plus working with the cities and workforce housing. Again, that's not before you. Do you think it's a good idea to have workforce housing at one of these sites? That's the question before you.
But my concern was understanding the zoning, because if it's not zoned for workforce housing, then why would we suggest workforce housing?
If you think that a site would be appropriate for workforce housing, regardless of what the county has for zoning, if it's unincorporated, regardless of what the city has for zoning, frankly, regardless of what you think the board wants to do, but you guys think it's a good idea, deem it surplus, and what your priorities is, we recommend the board seek a way to facilitate workforce housing at this site. It may take people like the board and Lewis and me a few years to work through that because there will be legal complications. You're not gonna figure that out. You shouldn't have that as your burden. So.
I wish we'd have known that at the beginning.
This committee's had a lot of information. And I'm not opposed to providing information to the committee. That's dump information to the committee, frankly. Get as much as you can in front of you. You're at the point now where I think a decision has to be made on what you guys want to have to get done with these properties. Let's put that into the report, get it to the board. I don't know if you need further information on this, because at some point you get into how to do it, not whether or not this committee thinks it's a good idea. So take a step back from how to do it. That's really not your burden. Please don't take it on. You don't need to take that on. If you think it's a good idea, recommend it to the board. That's my objective point I wanted to make.
I just want to ask a question, Mr. Freeze, in our earlier discussion, when you contacted Terra Realty about the zoning changes, what did they indicate with respect to value?
So. And maybe I turn that over to Mr. Henderson, but we had asked the question. And the values hadn't really changed very much, even though the density may be increasing. But the assessed valuation did increase. Twofold by that.
And we didn't we had some direction. We helped get some of these APNs correct, et cetera. We didn't look at valuation. Again, I think the estimates, those are estimates for the valuation, frankly, from before. I don't think they're drastically changing. Now, if this committee determines, hey, a site could be used for development, and forget workforce, just for building houses, well, the valuation in the highest best use suddenly increases a ton compared to, let's say we keep it as a park. That would be just a natural indication of valuation, but adjusting the numbers from Terra Realty from the last few months, nobody's done that right now.
Okay. John?
I've got to disagree with your statement that we should not worry ourselves with how something might happen. I think it's important that we be realistic about what can be done there. We can all dream and have our wish lists, but if it's not realistic, why would we waste our time on that? Why would we waste the board's time on that? Especially if we're gonna provide an unrealistic recommendation that they're gonna just reject wholeheartedly and then do whatever they want to do. I think we need to be a little bit more realistic. And I'm gonna use Seaview as an example on the valuation on there. The CCRs, I'm just ballpark, I thought I said like 21 units at Seaview, 21 or 26, not very many. They have to be single story, single family residential units. Well, if all of a sudden those CCRs are no longer relevant, a developer might want to put in a 4-story set of condos in there with 150 units. I gotta believe that 150 units is gonna be worth more than 21 units. And so I think it does make a difference.
Anyone want to repeat? I like it much.
Right, so the motion is to postpone any discussion or action on the uses of the sites until presentations on workforce housing, swapping properties, zoning, and potential reuse options have been made to the committee, and that's the motion that's before us. Is there any more discussion?
I have a question, comment. I don't think we need to go through workforce housing discussions, to make recommendations. I think that amongst the discussion, we can say, ask our questions about what we think workforce housing should look like. And even in our recommendations, we can say, this is what we would like to see from workforce housing, qualify that with saying, granted, we didn't get a presentation from Terra Realty, but this is what we would like to see based on the information we have at hand, right? So I don't think we need to have an exhaustive, well-studied understanding of workforce housing or zoning policies to make recommendations to the board, who they will have to make those decisions based on more elegant processes than this, right? We're simply starting the process for them, making recommendations. What happens ultimately is up to the board.
Okay, time to vote. Mr. Antilo? Would you like to hear the motion one more time?
Yeah, I think we all would.
Okay, here is the motion. Member Gosney moved to postpone any discussion or action on the uses of the sites until presentation to the committee. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that that's on workforce housing, swapping properties, zoning, and other potential reuse options have been made. Okay, Mr. Antilo,
Yes.
Ms. Torres,
No,
Ms. Anwani,
Yes.
Mr. Goslin,
Yes.
Ms. Siegler.
No,
And Mr. Chair, again, we have a situation where your vote would affect the outcome if you were to vote no. If you were to vote yes, then no.
I'm voting no.
You're voting no. So that is 3 yes, 3 no.
Okay, I want to get something done.
Understood.
All right, so, if there are no objections, I would like to write the word housing with respect to the Adams site. It seems to me whether we're discussing workforce housing or housing for private developers to be sold, resold, regardless, it's shelter for people.
I don't understand what you mean by
Okay,
where you're inserting that as a motion.
I'm not, I'd just like to entertain a motion that we enter one as a use for the Adams site housing.
I think we should actually have more specific definitions, like subcategories of housing, because there are well, for workforce housing has different rules that applies to it than regular housing than like private sector housing. So to me, they are different. Maybe a subcategory, I don't know how we want to look at it.
I didn't hear a second my motion, so.
You don't make motions.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say if there are no objections, but that's the right, I can hear the objection.
I
So
don't think there's an understanding on that.
Yeah, can you repeat your?
Yeah, I don't even understand it
my,
enough to
my,
answer.
my observation is that regardless of whether we're talking about workforce housing or housing to be sold to, members of the public at large, it's still housing.
Okay.
And I haven't heard a reference to other uses. I haven't heard where we should sell it to, we cannot build a school there because of the restrictions on earthquake. But a charter school could build a school there because they don't have the same restrictions.
That's true.
It's not zoned commercial. It's, I don't see anyone, it doesn't have roads that will support traffic for a commercial use. You're not gonna put a shopping mall there. Not that anyone would.
So are we suggesting that we have to make a motion through the chair to suggest what the surplus property has on it? Because affordable housing could be put up there right now.
Okay, I think I'm confused because I'm hearing contradicted. I hear on one side, someone saying, move, just let them know what you guys wanna do with it. Don't worry about if it's doable. Let's just put something up there. But then I hear you talk about, well, this site might not be zoned for this, so where's the logic behind it? I mean, are we like getting the information to then be able to put recommendations up that are gonna be doable? Or are we just, let's build, a big swimming pool
I
and,
wanna go back to offer you the legal opinion, which was what, not how.
well, and then, but now your thought frame was the how,
It
because of the,
wasn't, the what is housing.
If I may, I think the confusion I'm sensing is I asked to draw a distinction within categories of housing, right? Because I don't think we needed special training or special knowledge for this, but there are different kinds of housing, right? And we can make recommendations, like in the same recommendation, we can have conflicting recommendations. We can say, we would love to see single family homes. Oh, we would also love to see high density homes. Like our recommendations can be, these are the realm of possibility that we could see possibly here, right? We could also very, very specifically say, we do not want to see high density housing. We do not want to see single family housing, whether or not the zoning applies or whatever. I think just saying we want housing as a blanket statement isn't specific enough of a recommendation. That was my point.
Could we ask member to clarify that if she's speaking about ranking, and is that a motion?
No, I was not. So to be clear, I'm not talking about ranking. I'm talking about in our recommendation, because it sounded like what the chair was saying was, as we write down on the board our ideas of what we want, he suggested we write housing, because that's something we want. We all agree we want housing. Yes, I'm suggesting that if in our discussions of housing and our recommendations, we go more into detail of what that could mean.
In different categories.
Yeah, so I'm not saying, yeah,
Okay.
I'm not, I like the idea of housing. I'm just saying, as we develop and we go further into our recommendation, we expand on that.
And raise the tone.
I don't disagree with most of what you're saying there, but sadly, the state of California and the county supervisors have already, they've got control over the density of the housing. And unfortunately, they want to stack houses on top of houses on top of houses, and then a few more on top of that, because they've got a mandate to increase X number of housing units in each given area. And so this idea of low density versus high density, it's out of our hands, it's out of the school district's hands completely.
One moment, I just have one question. This is a legal question.
Sure.
Adams is located in the county of Contra Costa, not in the city of Richmond. Therefore, the planning and zoning is at the
County level.
pleasure of the county. The county has housing targets, as do the cities. Are we, meaning the district, are we compelled to acknowledge and comply with whatever the county says?
Not in all instances. And again, that was what I was saying about 5 minutes ago regarding the exemption from local zoning for schools and AB 2295, a brand new law that just went into effect that frankly, only a couple of districts are trying to figure out how it applies. So sorry, you asked a simple question. I gave you a long answer. The short answer is, not in all instances. Now, whatever housing, let's say the district does develop, goes to the RENA numbers, that goes to the housing element for either the city or the county, and it goes to the state. So your units would help satisfy that housing element of requirements to any city or county. So the city would probably advocate for additional housing coming from it. And if, again, this committee wants to make that determination, I think the secretary said it correctly. Which ones, by the way, you should add an S on prior to use. Prior to uses, or would be the first recommendation. If that doesn't work, you can have, I'll exaggerate and say list of 20 uses, but you can list a number of different things. If I try to do this, try to do this, try to do this. Sorry, I went beyond your question. I apologize.
John?
I don't believe anybody has suggested that the WCC USD get into the housing development business, that we would most likely be selling a site and the new owner would not be exempt from it, like you said. That's not like, because it'd no longer be the school district that would own the property.
Yes.
And the new owner would have to adhere to the county's demands. So I said, we're not in the housing business as a school district. I thought we were in the education business. So, you know, nobody's even talking about the school district actually developing the site, talking about potential, who should they look for as a buyer, a housing developer or a strip mall kind of thing? That shops, we agree, strip mall is not a consideration. But, so I said, the exemption that we talked about, I said, I don't see it how it applies.
If I may, just real quick, if you're talking about workforce housing for the district's employees, we actually almost certainly would retain ownership.
Yes, that's different.
Yeah. So I wouldn't make, that was distinction between, you're right, selling it for residential development. You're right, whatever the city and county imposes stays. If the district does it as workforce housing, then those are the instances where I think an answer to, now I forget whose question it was. Can we, waive some zoning or work with the city on lower requirements? Yes, we can.
Okay, all right.
So I just wanted to get a clarification from council. You did mention, I thought you had said that we shouldn't concern ourselves with zoning, we shouldn't concern ourselves with earthquake faults, basically. You didn't say those words, but we shouldn't concern ourselves with,
Yeah,
you
don't
know,
put the word,
things
the
like,
earthquake
like
fault.
that, just come up with ideas, that we could, and recommendations that we could give, to, the board, and just put those, issues aside.
If you're finding it surplus, but you want to do something, and I was saying that in the context of workforce housing, frankly.
Okay.
And I didn't mean to make it interpreted too broadly, because, member Ghazi's accurate. If this is sold to somebody else, they're bound by all the restrictions.
Right.
So that does come into play. That's why the zoning is still up there. So that does come into your, if you guys want to recommend that it gets developed as perhaps affordable housing, but fair market housing, whatever, then, you know, take into consideration that zoning. If you're contemplating workforce housing and a district do it for teachers and employees, those are the instances we're saying, those aren't necessarily imposed. I don't want to say it's not a slam door, and that's why I'm saying don't get into the how, because it may take years to work with a city or county to work through that.
There were 3 yeses and 3 nos. So the motion failed.
Oh, sorry. We didn't have a motion on that.
He's
I
referring to the last motion.
the last motion,
Motion?
Yeah.
Don's motion to postpone it all. So the motion failed, so we can continue the discussion at the next meeting. At the next meeting.
Actually, no, we can continue this.
To the next
one.
We
I
can
wanna-
continue it now because the motion failed.
Yeah, I want to,
Is there any-
if I can, this is not for discussion. But, a lot of the things that have come up in, over the course of meetings, has been referenced to a draft report. And so I printed out a report from a 7-Eleven committee for the Cupertino Union School District, which is a TK through 8 school district that had approximately 3 school sites to review. And I made copies for each and every person here. So, and I'd like to provide those with you. Please read it on your own at home. We will discuss it at another meeting, because I'm concerned about getting some sort of draft report initiated. Well, it's been initiated, but the body of the report, to my knowledge, is yet to be written. So, Don, you have a point?
I'm just gonna ask that, would you mind emailing us the digital versions of that? So we can archive it in our own.
I don't
folders.
mind emailing, the reference. You know, I can
Even that's fine.
send you the link.
That's fine.
Do you not want a paper copy?
Well, yes, I do, but again, I archive everything. I go back for decades on these things.
Okay,
Paper disappears in my house.
anyone else, wish to have a link to the report?
I'm just Googling it now, so I'll find it.
And this will be made public.
It is public.
Yeah, you can just Google
It-
Cupertino 7-Eleven board recommendation.
Yeah. So, having said all that, just like being back in the classroom, that's fine.
Still the draft, right?
Thank you.
It's just a draft. It's a-
Now, I had, just an aside, I had printer problems with my printer. And so you guys all have a copy courtesy of my copier rather than, so there's the photographs come out a little bit blurry.
Yeah.
But the body is there, and, what I'd like to draw your attention to when you start reading it is how it came brief.
19 pages.
Yeah, 19 pages. That's, and you'll see the word draft, it's draft also. Okay. So now, I believe we're down to, we've done E1.
Yeah.
And we're down to E2, listing a list of priority uses for the surplus sites. And we've tried to run on housing. I think that's my personal observation. But,
What were you trying to achieve, Jim? Like, did you
I
just
would
want to write it on the board?
like to have, like, I think with respect to some of the sites, I remember the citations that Don has been trying to make about prior uses, from Terra Realty. So in some ways, I'd like to just put them up so that we can, have some sort of reference, but,
If I need a recommendation, what we do, how about a 5-minute recess? That would allow you to list all the recommendations that you have heard or wanted to consider. We can certainly do that.
Yeah.
So there's.
So, yeah, sure.
Actually, you have to say that part.
I know.
Sorry. Okay.
So, I'd like to take a break for 5 minutes, a 5-minute recess while I go back. I have my volume from the previous, meetings. And so I'd like to put up what I have from, Terra Realty from before.
And come back.
And we'll be back at 7:20. Okay, very good. Calling the meeting back to order. I put up information, and this is from my notes of July 28 of 22 and August 25 of 22. And these are from my notes with respect to the presentation from Terra Realty. So at that time, the uses that were proposed were housing across the board. And the zoning for Adams was at that time R6, which meant 6 units per acre, 8.5 acres. So it would be single family homes. Harmon Knolls, Harmon Knolls is interesting because there are multiple family, or shall we call it multiple story, multiple family units on one side of the property and single family units on the other side of the property. And so looking at the surrounding uses, the recommendation was that they look for multiple family units, 18 units per acre and 90 units. Portola, the housing, townhomes, it's 75 units, and they estimated that they would go for $1.5 million apiece on that site. And Sea-Doo, because of the CCNR, is housing with single family homes, 21 units. So that's where things stood at the time. And Harmon Knolls, the projection by Terra Realty, if we don't allow that to happen, the projection from Terra Realty will be off the chart. Okay. So. And it's what I'd like to entertain would be additional uses or other uses. So it's time to,
Are you asking? Because we need a motion to go in discussion, are you asking that we? Call a motion to do these one by one, or,
I'd like to do them one by one.
okay, so.
So with respect to Adams.
is there a
And I
motion for
guess
recommendation?
the other part we heard here was workforce housing. In which case the district becomes the landlord. Don?
I think we need to add to the, so we're just talking about Adams, I think we need to add to the list, the swapping the property. Yeah, just outright selling the property. Recreational use.
Yeah, when you get to reading the report I gave you, among the definitions in there is the highest and best use. And it's my understanding that when we start looking at recommendations, we also want to look for the highest and best use of the land. So when we start setting priorities, we need to consider highest and best uses and set priorities. Highest use usually is monetary. Best use is not necessarily monetary.
Best for who?
Yeah, isn't that subjective?
That's the question. So. But there are criteria in there with respect to highest and best use, whether it's economically feasible, legal, otherwise permitted. And I should go back and pull the definition out of here. The highest and best use if the is the most profitable legally permissible for which the property is physically, geographically, and economically adaptable. Yeah. Okay. So. And if you want, Don, I could just extend these.
Yeah, I was gonna say they should fall under all of those properties, basically.
Although, I mean, I don't know if this is a new discussion topic, but I feel like for Harmon Mill, given our recommendation not to surplus, that should, I think we should have a different discussion there.
It's off the table.
It's off the table. Can't. We're not gonna, you know, we haven't.
I'm not asking
we
you to
haven't
change your
declared-
vote. I'm not asking you to change your
No,
vote. I'm
I-
asking for discussion on record of alternate uses, given that it's not surplus, that our recommendation is not to surplus it.
Well, then sorry,
It's just a conversation.
I understand, but if it's not going to be
Uh-huh.
recommended to be declared surplus,
It would be a loop.
it's off the table for us to even make a recommendation.
Let me, we're going free flow again, so let me. go
Yeah, I
back.
hate when we have to
Recognize
talk
one
to her.
person. Excuse me, Don, I just want to recognize one person at a time. Okay, Sam, did you finish?
I know, I don't feel that we as a body have discussed, simply voting no on surplusing Harmon Knolls doesn't really, I think, get to the heart of what our recommendations are. So good, no surplus. With that said, we need to acknowledge that that means that that site's gonna stay vacant and unused for an unknown period of time. And so for as responsible citizens making recommendations about taxpayer land, how can we justify by alternate uses, maintaining a vacant publicly owned taxpayer site for an unknown period of time? What are what can be done otherwise?
Don?
Since we are not making a recommendation to the board to do anything with Harmon Knolls, since it's not to be considered surplus. That's 7-Eleven committee, we're supposed to be dealing with surplus properties. So why are we singling out Harmon Knolls on potential reuses and not every other site in the school district? Because it's not part of our purview.
I see.
That's my concern.
Right, so when we had our discussion about voting on whether or not to make the site surplus, I'm not exactly sure that we all members had the opportunity to really discuss what not surplusing the site meant in terms of there can only be a school there now, right? Well, our recommendation is there has to be a school there and that's it, right? Is that what my understanding of surplus means, is that we're not surplusing it, so there has to be a use for a school?
No,
No.
No. You know, I'm at a loss because I feel like we're putting restrictions on things in curious ways. And we seem to always get hung up on Harmon Knolls and never dispose of the other properties. Looking, could we put the picture back up on the screen, please, of Harmon Knolls?
Sorry, perhaps we can just finish with Portal and Seaview,
Yeah,
so we take care of the three that we are recommending surplus, and then return back to discuss Harmon Knolls.
That's fine by me.
yeah, in a moment. I know this is a critical issue for you, but if the district enters into a joint use agreement with the city of Richmond with respect to that part that's to the left of the line of demarcation that goes through the middle of the parcel, that's not necessarily leaving the land vacant or unused. The city of Richmond would have to assume responsibility for maintaining that which is recreation. So there might be a public benefit to that. Okay, so can we shelve that for a while and go on and follow Don's recommendation that we just finish with the other sites?
Yeah, that's fine. I just don't feel we've had enough discussion on it.
Okay. Like to move along.
We're actually at Adam.
We were at Adams and we was workforce housing, selling, swapping, recreational. And the previous opinion was, with respect to the 6 units per acre. And I haven't put valuation up there because I think the valuation is, it's like 2 years old now. And we were sort of, I'd like to, we'll revisit that. With respect to Portola,
Hold on, I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to do this one by one, so is this,
so we
are
finished,
you asking, are you finished with this? Are you asking for no objections or for a motion to adopt this? And I'm, again, just talking about
Okay.
Adams, let's, I believe you're vice chair. Adam.
yes, Art,
Yeah, I had other suggestions for Adams, but. if you want to
okay,
move on.
go ahead.
I mean, logistics centers, that hasn't been discussed, or maybe even a solar farm,
Logistics center?
yes.
Solar
Centers,
farm? Center.
center or centers.
Solar farm.
That sounds like trucking.
Yeah,
Any
if,
others?
maybe if we're just throwing stuff at the wall, I mean, storage facilities.
This is why. Okay. Any other recommendations with respect to Adams? Okay, moving on to Cornwall. Excuse me, I haven't had the motion.
Did we
And
add
you don't,
charter school?
I'm sorry,
We forgot to add charter school. We had discussed it, but we didn't write it on the board.
Let me turn it up here. So we'll go scroll. Okay. All right, Don?
I would recommend not trying to proceed with a motion to either accept these things or reject them tonight. As I said, right now, I'm still looking for that information I've been asking for months. And without information, I'm not gonna vote for or against any of this.
It's a draft, does it matter to you? I mean, we're just drafting this thing. Does it matter?
Well, we don't have to have a motion to just keep these things on the list. We've created a list, haven't we?
I want to check with my parliamentarian about that.
so if you don't wanna have a motion, we don't have a motion and we can continue, if you say, if there's no objections, we will just continue to the next property.
Okay,
And at some point, if we don't finish it tonight, at some point, when we have the whole list,
This
we
is,
can have a motion.
yeah, this isn't an action item.
no. All right, so if there are no objections, I'll continue writing things down as you guys suggest them. All right? So, Portola, just FYI, the Portola site is at the bottom of the Blakemont slide area. So the whole site is unstable. So it's gonna take a lot of investment of whoever builds on it to render it relatively safe for whatever use. Just if you want to make an observation. All right, so uses for the Portola site, which is,
We have the ability to.
it's not evident because the picture is flat, but there's quite a bit of slope there. And it goes all the way down to where you see the asphalt, which is now occupied by a charter school. And the current trespassing, if you will, current use of the corner by the UC Master Garden Program is simply a permitted use at the moment. It will not affect the transfer of the property. So, Fair Realty recommended 75 units of townhouses to take advantage of both the slope and the view. There's an outstanding view. So we have just continuing across workforce housing, selling, swapping, recreation. It's not fit for a logistics center, might be fit for a solar farm. Not fit for a storage facility.
But is that for us to determine?
Ron?
I said, I was not recommending workforce housing for the Portala site. I think that the soil stabilization would cost a fortune. And if the district is gonna retain it and develop it themselves, we gotta ask ourselves, how many teachers do we wanna lay off? How many administrators do we wanna lay off to be able to pay for that, just that part of it?
Okay, so we can take workforce housing off the list.
Off of,
I don't think we need to remove it from the list. I mean, it's a possibility. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. I think it should be a consideration.
Okay. Yeah, someone, any thoughts? Ms. Laura, any thoughts?
No,
Okay.
you guys could keep going.
So I got, one person would like to remove it, one person would like to keep it. All right,
Through the chair, I agree with Sam or
Okay.
Member Torres.
leave it on there. Okay, so leave it on there. Selling is swapping and recreation, it's not recreational. Well, could be.
Sports.
What sport would you play on a sport?
Sports facility you couldn't put on there?
No.
I mean,
No, it's
that,
a lot of
that's,
work.
but I thought that
I
was,
mean, that's not our concern.
yeah,
right?
that's not our concern. I think that's what we keep going back, like, keep on dreaming.
That's
Like,
it.
dream away.
I can envision an awful lot of.
You can inject
pickleball
common
courts.
Yeah, there
sense
you
in.
Possible, possible, yeah.
I'm not recommending.
I was gonna say, Don said.
No.
pickleball.
I said, no, I said I can envision a lot of it. Not recommending.
Would that be a
So-
priority? use?
Are we gonna start
It's on the
a
list, so
Priority use.
I think Don is saying that's actually not what he wants on. Is that what you want?
No,
on the
no, I
priority
said,
list?
he asked the question, what kind of recreational could you do there? And I said, I can envision pickleball courts. They're small enough. They would fit on you go north to south, they would fit on there and on the sloped parts of it, without any problem at all. Not recommending it. I would go with housing if I owned a piece of property.
So are you asking this
Do you want it removed?
pickleball?
No,
tennis
that was never
to be
even a
on the
question.
list?
You asked a simple question, I responded to it. What kind of recreational? could
So
be
I
there?
wrote down. what-
Yes, and she wants to know if I want to remove. No. That was never my suggestion.
You would like it erased.
No,
No,
Then
erase?
it's,
Oh,
then
yes.
it's stay
Yeah.
out.
Great.
I want to show the board and the public just how goofy we can all be.
Well, throw in a thrift store then.
No. It's too big.
I mean, we have.
Okay.
Could retail be, does anybody
Yeah,
think
retail.
retail would be good?
Yeah.
I mean,
If-
retail,
But the
okay,
location doesn't.
yeah.
They need another 7-Eleven there.
Wait, is that Starbucks?
No, I said they need another 7-Eleven.
7-Eleven.
Oh, I thought you said.
7-Eleven.
7-Eleven.
There's a 7-Eleven on stock.
Yeah, there you go.
Alright,
So are,
any,
it sounded like they added retail.
Retail, yeah.
you
Retail.
wanna add repaint?
Mm-hmm.
So could we add a commercial to that as well?
Commercial what?
doesn't matter, it's commercial, it's a large gamut.
And I guess I'm curious too about the possibility of like swapping, right?
Right.
And so is this a piece of property that if it came down to it? I think in the initial presentations, it said, if this isn't usable, you swap with something that is. And maybe this is a property that should be explored.
But it's, the swapping was put across all the schools.
Yeah.
As an option.
But
I don't disagree with you.
So you want more detail, you wanna elaborate on that, right? What that could look like?
I don't know.
I will say quickly, normally if a 7-Eleven committee is gonna recommend exchange, but swap is fine by this, for
Okay.
exchange. For what? Meaning
Exactly.
exchanging it for another parcel, okay, parcel, but that means that you guys are thinking another parcel would be used for something. Usually it comes with, you don't swap it for something, you know, that is just as unbuildable as that. You swap it for something that you would think you're gonna use, right?
Okay, just a second. Art
And that would
and
go
Don,
to like a developer, right?
Yeah.
Whoever thinks they can take that slope at Portland and do something with it, yeah.
hang on, Art and Don, and then follow up.
I would like to ask, legal counsel, what can we swap for? Do you know, and where, would it have to be properties in California or Northern California, or we restricted to the swap?
You should be only swapping for properties within the district, so there's a statute about the exchanging of property for schools. It actually can be done without surplus, but it oftentimes comes up in the 7-Eleven community context. You should be swapping it for something you need. And unless the district can demonstrate it needs property in Marin for some reason.
Right.
It will almost always, and I can't even think of an example when it's not within the district. Now, you could find something far away, but we'd have to come up with some logic why you need something miles away. So you're swapping it for something inside the district.
Don and then go.
When the presentation was made before the board by Dr. Wold about 5 years ago, and then when it was made by Chair Realty, it wasn't swapping a piece of property. You know, land for land. It was swapping a piece of land that we've got for another piece of land that had an existing revenue generating business. The one they love to throw up is one that is way away from where the school district was. That had a Home Depot on it, bringing in $1 million a year in revenue to the school district. That was the example used for us. So, and if it wasn't within the district, it wasn't close by even, but it was, again, something that had an existing business on it, whether it's apartments or a Taco Bell or a Home Depot. All three of those were mentioned in the presentations. That's what was considered on for swapping.
Right, and. Okay,
Move ahead of that.
what do we think?
I think to me, it just seems like we're, really thinking really broad when it comes to our recommendations. And just as we're thinking broad, I feel that when if we sent out all these recommendations, which seems to be the same recommendations for each site, basically, over and over, we're not really giving the board direction on our recommendations. We're just kind of giving them room to like expand and also say, well, they threw pickleball in there, maybe I want, I don't know, a bowling alley or something. And I think that's kind of where I am just sitting here, just taking it in, that we're not being realistic in our recommendations, and we're not, really sitting down thinking, okay, this is what we're gonna recommend to the board, and this is doable, and we're all gonna stand behind it. It just seems like we're just throwing out all these ideas of what could be and what might be, and I don't see this holding any weight at the board level.
Okay, I'll get right back to you in a second, Stan. We can go through a decision tree where we do a binary comparison, this versus that, and which one would we prefer with respect to the highest and best use, and we can then rank these things, but right now we're just brainstorming.
But I also think that when brainstorming, we also have to have some context behind it, and with what Summer just brought up, Ms. Ziegler, about what does it look like to exchange? And what can we exchange it for? We can't even contemplate that recommendation because we don't have enough information behind it of what that looks like, or at least I don't.
We can talk about it now.
Just hang on a second. Okay, Sandy, good point.
Oh, no, my point is that I hear everything you're saying. I think that we are not at the point where, well, one, we are making informed decisions, right? I get that that contradicts what I said earlier, that we don't need all the information. We're making decisions based as community members, input from the communities that we live in, right? As parents, as residents, whatever. We hear from our community what our proposed uses for these sites. We can inform recommendations based on that as well. Now, if I say I want to build Disneyland here, we got a couple people to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not within the scope, or this is not within, feasibility. That's why these discussions are here for. That's why we're. So I get that it seems really broad, but, I think this is the start of getting to a more refined point.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Well, I'd like to move on to C. Or, yeah, if everyone, we have, Portland is townhomes originally, recreational use, some sort of court, retail or commercial, and this could be just, possibly exchanging that for this use to obtain this use in order to have an income stream. Yes, no? Okay. Jim. Don?
For Seaview, I do not see retail and commercial as being a viable option considering its location and the fact that it's right in the heart of essentially a residential area with very poor access in from San Pablo Avenue. That's one of those sites that either selling it or swapping it may be an option, but that residential may be the best reuse of that site. Even that, being right next to a couple of railroad lines and essentially a swamp, not particularly that great either.
No disagreement, all right.
Yeah, I've, like Don, I've worked in the industry for a long time, but, I was just curious, can we, even, entertain like swapping for PG&E and, power plant? Because it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot you can do with that property.
Yeah, so we're talking about, recommendation would be selling or swapping and getting, income producing. Right.
Right. So can we include PG&E, in that,
The solar
conversation for
farm
swapping
or just,
Swapping the property,
with PG&E?
so add swap with PG.
Because as Don pointed out, there's already a couple pumps there for West County wastewater. In the facility, I mean, in the area, immediate area.
Can I ask a question? Are you proposing exchanging for property that you're gonna do something with?
No,
Okay.
so, following up, you're talking about retaining title to it, but allowing PG&E to put a solar farm on it or something
yeah,
else?
whatever they deem, they could use it for.
Oh, so that's not exchanging. You're not getting other property back. You're
Adding them to the sales list, considering them for purchase,
okay, so it's not exchanging,
Right.
not swapping. You're talking about
right?
offering it, if you will, to
It
the
could
local
be if they have
utilities.
the property, available to do that. They have office buildings and property everywhere. Yeah,
So I should take the word swap off and put on develop with PG&E or energy.
for possible sale to PG&E.
Well, if it does get voted on as surplus by the board, then that would initiate certain, like, priorities, right?
The public
Yeah,
offerings.
The public, so that would be part of the natural next step, if the board were to vote it for surplus, is it wouldn't just go to, the highest bidder right away. There has to go through public offerings before it can be made a publicly available, first serve kind of place, so.
Let me sit down here so I can moderate this.
Are you okay, Jim?
I'm feeling surplus up there.
That's a good question.
Is the public offerings just if it's declared for sale?
Or long-term lease, is that
Got
what
it.
it said, yeah.
Sale or long-term lease.
And by the way, PG&E is not a public entity, so they don't get part of the public offerings, they're a utility.
That's true.
But would they qualify as a nonprofit?
No.
Not according to my bill.
Not in about 40 years, no.
No,
No, those are not.
No.
And nonprofits don't get an offer.
that's what I was asking if there, I don't know the priorities in that. in that
Yeah, no,
detail.
fair question, I'm sorry, I did, yeah, but no, nonprofits aren't, they don't get priority. It's public entities that get that, public offer.
I think we have to include on Seaview transitioning part of the property for the Bay Trail. I know that we've got a representative from the East Bay Regional Parks here, perhaps she would like to add comment on behalf of the Bay Trail, but I think it needs to be something to bring to the board one way or the other.
So grant easement to East Bay Regional Park District. Of 0.75 acres.
And by the way, I received a new map just a couple of days ago from Sarah with East Bay Regional Park, which I emailed to you all a little bit ago.
Hold on, I'm sorry to interrupt you doing minutes and I want to make sure we don't get too far. Your acronyms. We don't use acronyms in minutes.
EBRPD, East Bay Regional Park District.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative from the Park District has raised her hand. I'm not sure you're entertaining public comment, but.
Yes, we
Well,
have-
this is the time for her to say something.
So if I could finish on the two maps that I emailed to you
When?
a few hours ago.
Just before the meeting.
Okay, I had copies printed out, I left them on my kitchen table, I apologize for that. Yeah, I'm doing a lot of that later. But anyway,
You've been on mute.
Louis, I sent, emailed them to him a little bit ago in case he wants to put them up on the screen. The problem I've got is I was sent two different variations of these aerial photographs of it with different routes for the Bay Trail. So I'm not quite sure which one is the one that said the district would be looking at, or if there'd be a third one on there. It's not up to us to decide that here and now, but if one of them doesn't even, it just skirts the outside of our property, whereas the other one takes up, as you said, about 3/4 of an acre of the property. But that has an impact.
Mr. Freeze,
Yes.
do you have this map? And can we get Ms. Wilson on?
Ms. Wilson, you can unmute.
Hi, can you hear me? Great, this is Suzanne Wilson. I'm a senior planner with the Trails Program and in East Bay Regional Park District. And I believe my colleague Sarah Rake just sent the map that she sent to Mr. Gosney either yesterday or earlier today is the most recent version of the map, and that is our preferred alignment. At this point, we've done about a 35% design, so we do have our preferred location identified, and you may have seen a prior map that does show, that may have shown the trail corridor outside of the property, as we do technically have an agreement with the Union Pacific Railroad to use the outermost 15 feet of their right of way in this area. But it would be a much better alignment, a less impactful alignment to be able to use the boundary, the shoreline boundary of the school district's property. The map that we shared with Mr. Gosney shows an area that is about 45 feet wide. We may not need that width. We may need more like 30 feet or 35 feet along the length of both parcels. So it's approximately 740 feet long. And the reason for that is because where the 15-foot corridor on the Union Pacific Railroad's property, it actually falls right within in a wetland. So we would prefer to not impact that wetland, to be able to be on higher and drier ground, which would be on the school district side. So if you've been out onto the property, you may be thinking, oh gosh, 40 feet in from where the K-rail is eats up a big chunk of that property. But the boundary is actually off the slope, kind of closer to the railroad tracks. So the trail corridor that we're talking about using would build up a portion of the slope and use just a smaller portion of the graded platform that currently exists there. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the project, the trail location, or where we are in the process.
Just as a favor to the chair, could you send it to the chair?
I can, yes.
Thank you.
Sure,
My
send
personal
what-
email is jhsanders467@icloud.com.
JHSanders467.
At icloud.com.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
No problem.
And it's difficult. There are two railroad lines, as I recall. So you're talking about the double track that's on the shore side of the parcel. Is that not correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and so we're talking about going from approximately the back of the baseball field east to the back of the residential area.
Correct.
And then would there be a connector to the street?
So that we have identified as a potential corridor, which would be right about, yes, where that cursor just was on that short side of the property. And that would be a 20-foot easement to connect the neighborhood to the trail. We've been talking with the folks that live in that neighborhood about if this is a connection that they would desire, and it's still, you know, a discussion point for them. Some people have concern about inviting traffic into the neighborhood, yet others, you know, would like that direct access, especially the folks whose properties don't immediately abut the trail, the future trail, and the existing parkland. So it's still up for discussion, but it is something we would still like to keep on the table, is that short 20-foot wide easement for a connector.
And the surface of the trail would be what, pavement or gravel?
The surface would be pavement. So this is a gap closure project. The Bay Trail currently ends about a half mile to the west and about 0.4 miles to the east. And those sections are paved. And so this would be a paved section with 10 feet wide with soft shoulders on either side. So like maybe a 2 to 3 foot soft shoulder on either side.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Okay. So I've added in my notes to grant an easement to the East Bay Regional Park District of approximately 3/4 of an acre, 0.75 hundredths of an acre to the East Bay Regional Park District, which would not be developed for housing. And it would reduce the property to about 7 acres total. Okay, all right, Ms. Wilson, thank you very much. All right, so that brings us to the end of the list and also the end of our meeting time. So our next meeting will be on June 11th. Please review the sample report, draft report, and I'll be putting together an agenda about a week before the meeting, in the week prior to the meeting. So if you have something that you would like added to the agenda, just send me an email and or a text, and I'll take it from there with Mr. Cruz. Yes.
I was just curious about our committee member, that's been absent. Do you know if she's okay?
I don't know, I'll follow
Thank you.
up, call her.
So we're adjourned at what time?
So we are adjourned at 8:03, right, 20:03 hours, 8:03 PM. Thank you very much.